Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Lamed Aleph, Ba'e Rava Bebari He'ach, Ki Kamar B'Yochanan Ben Beroka, B'Shchiv Mera, Debar Orute Hu, Aval Bebari La. O Dilma, Afilu Bebari Nameh. Rava asks a question. What about a healthy person regarding the law of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka? Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, as we saw yesterday and then on the previous dapim, said that if a father wants to, he can give all of his inheritance to one son among many sons. And according to another interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, he can even say, if he has sons and daughters, I want my daughter to inherit everything and none of my sons. So a father has a certain leeway to redistribute his inheritance as long as it's someone who is in line to inherit. Now, this law, we assumed all along, was said regarding someone on his deathbed. And this is because the Pasuk says, Vaya biyom hanchilo et banav, on the day that a person bequeaths to his son. So we assume that means on the day right next to when he dies, on his deathbed. And indeed, someone on his deathbed has extra ability, powers to bequeath, and anything he says, it's as if it's in writing, and he can just say statements, and those have authority. It's like he did an actual transaction when he does so. So perhaps Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's rule that a father can redistribute his inheritance to one son or to a daughter and so on is only if he's on his deathbed, because that's what the pasuk seems to be referring to. But when he's healthy, then he cannot do so. Or do we say, no, there's no difference. Even when he's healthy and he's arranging his inheritance, he also can do the same thing and redistribute. We don't know from Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's words themselves, so is there a way we can figure this out? Amar le Rav Mesharshia le Rava Tashema Damar lo Rabbi Natan le Rabbi Shenitem Mishnatchem ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. So Rav Mesharshia answers Rava's question and says, I can learn it from the following Braita where Rabbi Natan, that's Rabbi Natan HaBavli, he's a Tana who came from Bavel, which is interesting. There are a number of Tanaim that we know came from Bavel, which gives us a hint of the rabbinic activity in Bavel during times of the Tanaim, which we don't know much about. We have in the time of the Talmud, the Amoraim in Bavel. Now we know a lot about them. We're reading about them right now. But the Tanaim in Bavel, there is no Mishnah that came from Bavel, but we have individual sages that came from Bavel. So there must have been and was a thriving Jewish community in Bavel. But we only kind of know them indirectly from people like Rabbi Natan HaBavli who came to Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, Rabbi Natan HaBavli told Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, and he said, you compiled in your Mishnah a teaching in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Ditnan. And so Rabbi Natan quotes the following Mishnah to Rabbi, telling him, you followed this Mishnah that you encoded and included in the Mishnah must only be according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. What is the Mishnah? It's one in Ketubot. Titnan. Lo katav la benin dichrin dievyan lich minai inun yirtun kesaf ketubatech yoter al chol kehon de'im achuhon. Chayav shetanai betin hu. The Mishnah is about the takana of benin dichrin. This is a takana that the rabbis made that in addition to that every husband has to write a ketubah to his wife, he also has to include the following clause. And even if he doesn't write down this clause in the ketubah, still he's responsible for it because it's a condition, a stipulation of the court that is absolutely required for every marriage. The stipulation has to do with her sons, her male sons. And so let's say a guy has two wives, and he has sons from one and sons from the other. They could not be from the same at the same time. It could be one after the other. So let's say he had a couple of sons from a first wife, and now he's getting married to a second wife, and he's planning on having children with the second wife. So he has to write in the ketubah, and even if it's not written, it's assumed that any male children that I have with you, they will inherit the money that goes to your ketubah, in addition to that which they will split together with their brothers. In other words, if you didn't have this clause, well then, this father has sons from the first marriage and sons from the second marriage. So then when he dies, all of his inheritance will be split into among all those brothers equally. That's what would happen without this clause. But the problem with that is that when the second wife gets married, she brings some money and property into the marriage that, let's say, her father gave her, and in addition, the husband promises her a certain amount, the 200 zuz, that's a basic amount for a first marriage, plus any other amount. So that if he dies first, then that payment will go to her, and she'll get it. And then eventually, when she dies, it will go to her sons only, not the sons from not her stepsons. So that's the normal progression. Here's the problem. Let's say she dies first. Well, then she's not going to get a ketubah payment, obviously, because she dies. And the husband, doesn't have to give anything to the kids just then, because the ketubah is not paid while he's alive. However, once he dies, then what will happen to all that money that would have gone to her? So it's not fair that all the children will divide equally the ketubah, that amount that would have gone to her, because a lot of that amount is coming from her father, who's like, okay, I'm happy to support this family here, my daughter and my son-in-law, but I don't want eventually, when they both die, for the money to go to some stepsons. I want it to only go to my grandsons, and to encourage him to give more. So the rabbis made this takana, that if we have such a case where she dies, a wife dies, and then the husband dies, any money that he would have paid in the ketuvah will go to her sons first. And after that amount is paid, whatever, it's $10,000, so we take $10,000 out of the estate, give it to her sons, and then whatever is left over will be divided among all the sons. And so, well, he probably has this, if he married twice, then he would have had this clause also in the first marriage with his other wife, and that will be true also. So if that with that wife, she brought in $5,000, and he promised her another $3,000, and so on. So then you'll also take out $8,000 from the inheritance to give it to the sons from the first wife, and so all that is paid out first, and only then whatever is left over is divided among them. Okay, that is the Mishnah. Now, what's the proof from here? Well, this case is actually the same as Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, because what you're doing essentially is you're saying that this guy, this father, although from the letter of the law, deoraita, you would take all of his inheritance and split it equally, but now we're not doing that. We're giving the sons of this particular wife a little bit more, right? Because maybe her ketubah is 10,000. The ketubah of another woman was only 8,000. And so these sons are going to get more than the other sons. And so this is permitted. And in fact, not only is it permitted, it's required. And even if you don't write it down in the ketubah, it's a condition of bet din and it's assumed. But so how do you do that? How can you give more to one son over some sons over other sons? Obviously, only because we're following Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Now, when does a husband agree to this? When he's writing the ketubah on his wedding day. On his wedding day, he's not on his deathbed, we presume. Rather, he's young and healthy, and he says, okay, yes, I'm going to prefer your sons and give them $10,000 right off the top, and then the rest, everybody, all the sons will split. So you see that they are applying the law of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. That's Rabbi Natan Habavli's point, that this Tanai assumes the law of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, and he does it while he's healthy. So we answered the question: yes, a father can redistribute the inheritance even while he is healthy. Now, the continuation of the Braita continues the discussion. V'amar Rabbi Yisbun Tenan. Rabbi said, no, not necessarily. Rabbi Natan Habavli is kind of like accusing Rabbi. Hey, how did you sneak in the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka and make it a Mishnah, right? Even though we did say before that Halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, so Rabbi Natan Habavli saying, "Oh, it seems like you're locking yourself in to Rabbi Natan Habavli by writing this Mishnah." And Rabbi Yehuda says, "No, it's not true, not necessarily, because I don't have the word yirtun, but rather in my version of the Mishnah, as I taught it, we have yisbun. Yisbun means they will take this amount, take as like a gift, not an inheritance. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's point here is that this is not working through inheritance law. If it is working through inheritance law, then it does assume Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, because only according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka can the father redistribute the inheritance among his sons. But Rabbi says, no, he's doing it as a gift. And remember, we said that a father can give a gift while he's alive to anybody he wants. It doesn't even have to be related. And therefore, this is not a proof that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, in which case it wouldn't be a proof for, it wouldn't answer Rava's question either. However, that's not yet the end of the Baraita. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda Nasi continues and says, Yaldu taita bi ve'azti panai benatan habavli. Rabbi later on in his life says, I said that when I was young, and because of my immaturity, I was insolent in front of Rabbi Natan HaBavli, and I said an answer against arguing against Rabbi Natan HaBavli that actually was wrong, and I changed my mind now that I've thought about it more. Ela dekay malan benin dichrin la tarfa mimishabede isalka datechis bunten an amai la tarfa mimishabede ela shmamina yirtun tenan. And so rather we hold that in order to pay out the takana of male sons, one does not take from repossessed property. In other words, let's say there's limited funds in the inheritance, and so now the wife died. Now the husband dies. Now her sons come and say, we want the ketubah to be paid, right? The inheritance, whoever's running the estate owes us $10,000. Now, let's say the estate doesn't have $10,000. So we said, well, at the time, some years ago, the father owned some land and he sold it in the meantime. Can they go and repossess that land? Well, if you say that the proper language is yisbun, which is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said it was, that is as a gift. Now, that means the father gave a gift a long time ago that will eventually be paid when he dies. That's basically like a loan. Now, a loan can be paid even from sold property, as long as the guarantee, the promise to pay the loan, was made before the sale of that land, so that land has a lien on it. So if you say it's a gift, which is the same as saying it's a loan, it's something that the father owed to these sons to be paid eventually when he died, then these sons should be able to go and collect from sold property. So why don't they do that? The law is that we do not allow them to go and collect from sold property. Rather, it must be that the proper language of the Mishnah is in fact yirtun, that it's an inheritance, because in inheritance, children only inherit that which the father has. They have no right to go after liened property that the father had sold beforehand. If the father, while he's alive, sells property, then that's it. That property is gone. It doesn't get inherited by the children. And so if it's an inheritance, then it's limited to what the father has and cannot go after a lien property. And that is in fact the law, that the benin dichrin do not get paid from lien property, and therefore it must be that it acts as an inheritance, not as a gift. Interestingly, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who is the compiler of the Mishnah, himself changed his mind about the proper wording of the Mishnah. It seems that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, although he's the compiler, is drawing from older sources, that one says this, one says that, and he himself had discussions about what the proper formulation should be, and changed his mind in between. Therefore, the proper wording is in fact yirtun, and the law of benin dichrin works through inheritance law, and yet it redistributes the wealth more to one son than the other, and therefore this is a proof that Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka's ruling works even when a person is healthy. Man shemat le diit le hai sebara Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka shmamina afilu bebari. So that's what we say here, right? So who says that in this Mishnah? Once you agree that this Mishnah has the word yirtun and is working through inheritance, who says that a father can redistribute and give more to one than the other? Only Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka thinks that, and a person is writing this while he's getting married, not on his deathbed, and so you see that this resolves Rava's dilemma. Yes, you can redistribute wealth and give more to one son over the others, even while you are healthy. אמר לרב פאפא לאביי, בין למאן דאמר יספון, ובין למאן דאמר ירצון, אין אדם מקנה דבר שלא בא לעולם. And now we have a question on this logic, and Rav Papa asks Abaye, whether according to the person who reads Yisbun in the Mishnah, or the one who says Yirtun, we see even the Biuda Nasi, even though he just said he changed his mind, but obviously there are two versions of the Mishnah, the version of Yisbun still does exist. So he says, either way, whichever one you follow, what's the mechanism for this takana to work? After all, a person cannot transfer ownership of something that doesn't yet exist in the world. And in this case, when they're getting married, this husband is telling the wife, any sons that we together will have in the future, they will collect this amount of the $10,000 that the ketubah payout is worth. And that's going to happen in, whenever it happens, in 20 years, or 50 years from then. But these children don't yet exist. So what's the mechanism? Whether it's a gift or an inheritance, either way, how can you transfer the rights to people that aren't yet born? ואפילו רבי מאיר דאמר, אדם מקנה דבר שלא בא לעולם, הנמי לדבר שישנו בעולם, אבל לדבר שאינו בעולם לה. And even if we follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says many times throughout Shas that a person can transfer ownership of something that has not yet come into the world. For example, so I'm going to sell you next year's crop from these trees. That you can do, even though those apples don't exist right now, but they will exist in the future and they're likely to grow, so I can sell you next year's crop of apples. Even according to Bimira says you can do that, that only refers to the item that's being sold. But even Rabbi Meir does not say that you can transfer something to someone who doesn't exist, right? You can only transfer apples that don't exist to another person who does exist in front of you. As long as the two parties currently exist, you can transfer apples that don't exist. But to transfer anything, even apples that do exist, to someone who doesn't yet exist, right? I'm going to transfer this to someone who will be born next year, who will be born in 10 years. Even Rabbi Meir doesn't think that can happen. So, back to the question, what's the mechanism of the takana of benin dichrin? Ela tenai betin shane hachaname tenai betin shane. Rather, must be that this is, because it's a stipulation of the court, this is different. A court can do anything they want when it comes to monetary matters. Hefker betin hefker. They can say, listen, this thing that you thought was yours, we decide, no, it's someone else's. Because a betin can do that, that is the mechanism of transfer. So we don't have to rely on this being a gift or an inheritance or something that doesn't yet exist in the world. We don't have to worry about any of those problems because the Bet Din decided and they put in. And you have to put into the ketubah. And if you don't put it in, we assume that it's in there. When this father dies, the Bet Din says, listen, this $10,000 that you promised to her, we are giving it to the sons. It just happens automatically like that. Now, based on that conversation, we bring it back to our discussion here, and now we see that this Mishnah does not necessarily follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, because it doesn't have to rely on the mechanism of inheritance. It can simply rely on the mechanism of the Bet Din said so. And if so, there is in fact no proof for the question of Rava that someone can redistribute his wealth even while he is alive and healthy, because this is not talking about a case of inheritance law at all. Amar le mishum dekama pikla bilshon irtun. However, Abaya says no, there is still a proof here, even though this is a Tanai Bet Din. Nevertheless, look how the Mishnah, according to the version that we have and the one that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi later authorized, because the Mishnah uses the language of yirtun, to inherit, so we can still learn from that inheritance law works in this way, right? Even though it is a Tanai Bet Din, you need the Tanai Bet Din to get the extra mile, to get that to that last step of you're giving it to someone right now who doesn't yet exist in the world. That's true. But nevertheless, this Tanai Bet Din is using the language of inheritance, and therefore we can learn that the law does follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, and that's how the redistribution is happening, and one can do so even when one is healthy. So we still do have a proof. Hadad Amad Abaye. That's what Abaye said at first, but then he said he changed his mind. A lot of people changing their minds in this sugya. Lav miletadhi da amari. Forget that which I said. Ditnan lo katavla benan nukvan de Yehevyan lichi mina Yehevyan yatvan bebeti v'yit zenan menichsai ad deti lakhan legovrin. Chayav shehu tenai betin. Abaye quotes another Mishnah in Masechet Ketubot that talks about a different takana that the rabbis made. And here also, you have to put this in the ketubah. And even if you don't write it in the ketubah, we assume as if it's in there, and the husband is and his estate is responsible for this. This condition is to take care of the girls, the daughters from this wife. And it says as follows: the daughters, the female children that I have with you, this is what a man writes to his wife when he marries her, that you have with me, they will be allowed to live in my house and be sustained from my property until they are married, until they're taken by men. The point of this takana is to take care of single daughters. While the father is alive, we assume a father is going to take care of his own daughters. After he dies, now the sons inherit. It could be the siblings, full siblings, or half siblings of these girls. Either way, the boys inherit. Now, what about the girls? What's going to happen to them? Now, since the sons inherited everything, these single girls are now out on their own. Can the boys just kick them out and say, we're not feeding you anymore? Go find a job? That wouldn't be fair. So therefore, the husband guarantees in the ketubah to his wife that any girls that we have, while they are single, if I should die, then the inheritance that goes to my sons has to pay for their sustenance, and they can stay in the house until they get married. So that is assumed even if one does not write it. Now, this clause it doesn't say the word inheritance in it, so it's not considered like an inheritance. Yehevyan, let them be, right? And this will be given to them. So this is considered like a gift. Now, and therefore, since we're reading these two clauses together, we're going to read it as if it's all one statement. And we learned earlier that if you take one inheritance and you give part of it to one person and part of it to another person, and you use two verbs, a verb as inheritance and a verb as a gift, then we can say, you know what, the person obviously meant that it should be a gift. Let's say the person gives it to a particular person who's not the one that normally is going to inherit everything. So it's still valid. Because you can give a gift to anyone. And if you use a double language, then we assume that since he's giving it to someone who is not normally going to inherit, but rather to someone else, that he must have meant the language of gift. And he said inheritance also, but he really didn't mean inheritance. He meant gift. And anytime you have one statement that has the double verb, and he says this one gets an inheritance, this one gets an matana, but they're all stated in one statement, then even the rabbis agree that it's okay, because it's one thing that's going to two people, and you said both verbs, and therefore it's okay. And therefore, Abaye says, I retract what I said, that this is a good proof for Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, and an answer to the question that you can do it while you're healthy, because in fact, it could be that the takana of sons is not working by inheritance, even though it says the word inheritance. That was his proof. But use the word inheritance. Therefore, this is a proof that it is B'yocham and Beroka, and you're doing it while it's healthy. I changed my mind now, Abaye says, because there's another clause right next to it. If we read them all as one, then you're giving something to two people, and you have both verbs, one as an inheritance and one as a gift. And in such a case, we just assume both of them are as a gift. And therefore, this is not a case of inheritance, and therefore there's no proof at all that this is even the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Amar le Rav Nachumi, v'it Rav Hananya bar Minyumi le Abaye. So now one of these sages of Nachumi or Minyumi tells Abaye, actually, I think you might have a good proof. Go back to your original proof that it says the word inheritance. Mimai de bechad bedina itikun, dilma betre bedina itikun. How do you know that both of these takanot, that are clauses in the ketubah, were made by one bet din at the same time, and you should read them all together as one statement? Maybe they were made by two different courts, unrelated to each other. These are two separate clauses. Remember how we saw that if you say one clause and then pause for 3 seconds, and you say another clause, then we don't put them together. So we here too, maybe read them as separate clauses, and therefore the one about a gift of regarding girls is not related at all. Because that's a gift, but the one about boys is a separate statement, and there it does say inheritance, and there it works, even though it's inheritance and you're redistributing while you're healthy. So it is a good proof. But the Gemara goes back and says, no, not necessarily so. La sakadatech. Tekatani resha, ze midrash tarash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lifnei chachamim bekerem beyavneh. Habanim yishuv habanot yizonu, habanim enan yorshin, ela lachar mitat avihem, af banot lo yizonu, ela lachar mitat avihen. The beginning of that Mishnah that we quoted earlier says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah derived the following law from a midrash, and he did this when he spoke in front of the sages at Kerem B'Yavneh. And he made the following analogy. He says, since in a ketubah it says these words, we can derive exactly from, it's a kind of like a hekesh between these two statements that are written back to back in the ketubah. He's making a derasha here, not on Pesukim, which is unusual, but rather on the legal language of a ketubah, which is self-interesting. It means derasha is not necessarily dependent on it being holy scripture, but rather on being a legal document. In any case, he says we can learn from the following words that since it says back to back that sons inherit and daughters are sustained, so we can compare the two laws. Just like sons only inherit after the father dies. They don't have right to any inheritance while the father is alive. So too, daughters only get sustained after the father dies. In other words, interestingly, and this was dealt with back in Ketubot, a father does not have necessarily a legal obligation to feed his daughters while he is alive. Only after he dies does this law kick in that his estate has to feed the daughters. Okay, that's a separate discussion. But the point is that the money will not go to the daughters while the father is alive, only after he is dead. So we see from the fact that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is deriving the definition of one law from the other. So what does that mean? If you say that both of these laws were said by one bet din, then it makes sense that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is learning one from the other. See, the same bet din taught both of these takanot, so therefore we can view it as one statement. And if we view it as one statement, then there's not necessarily inheritance here, because it says the word inheritance, says the word gift, and therefore we can interpret them both as being a gift, and there's no proof that this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So all that, then it would make sense. But if you say, as Abaye, when he retracted, said that we're talking about two different courts, and these are two separate statements, and therefore it is a language of inheritance, then how could Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah compare one to the other? How can he learn from one takana to the other if they were completely separate? So obviously he treats them all as one, and therefore there is no proof that this is using the mechanism of inheritance, and no answer to Rava. But then we go back once again, Mimai, Dilma leolam emalach bitre bedina itikun, ubedina batra tikun kebedina kama, kihechi dela takshe takanta atakanta. So how do you know that that's true? Maybe I can tell you that in fact both of these takanot were made by two separate batedin at two separate times. And the second one, when they made a takana, they made it in comparison with the first. And that therefore it is valid what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah did. Because a later one did not want you to wonder and challenge one takana against another. Let's say one takana, the ones for sons, only works when the father, after the father dies. And let's say they made the second takana and they said, well, really the daughters should be fed while the father is alive. So that takana, let's say they would make differently and say the father has to provide for his daughters while they're alive. Well, then people would get very confused. Wait, if that one is while they're alive, maybe that one's also while they're alive, and so on and so forth. And so therefore, in order so that people don't ask about a contradiction between the two takanot, they modeled the second one after the first purposely. And that's why, because the second one was modeled after the first, that's why the Elazar ben Azek can say, see, look, it's modeled after the first. So since the first one is only after the father dies, so too the second one's only after the father dies. But in fact, they are two separate takanot. And therefore, we should parse the ketubah as two separate sentences, as if you took a pause in the middle. And therefore, the language of a gift that's said regarding the female takana is a separate statement, and it does not come into play at all regarding the first statement. And the takana regarding the sons, that the sons of this wife should receive the ketubah payout, and it says the word inheritance. It says yartun. Therefore, that is working, although it is also a tanai betin, but it's also the rabbis are formulating it through the mechanism of inheritance. And if you're giving more to one child than the other, then that's to be Yochanan ben Beroka. And since a person is doing this on their wedding day, when they're writing the ketubah, or close to their wedding day, not on their deathbed, then obviously the answer to Rava's question is yes. According to Yochanan ben Beroka, one can redistribute his inheritance even while he is healthy and give more to some sons than to others. All right, after all that, we do have a positive outcome. Next, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, Hakotev kol nechasav liishto lo asa'ah ela apotropa. Rav Yehuda says to Shemuel that if someone writes in his will, I want to give all my property to my wife, then it actually does not all go to his wife as her property, but rather she is only an apotropos. While she's alive, she can run the estate, right? She is the steward to take care of things, but whatever she does has to be in the interest of the future heirs, which are the sons. Now, why would a person do that? Because the father wants to make sure that his sons will give honor to his wife. When we're talking about his wife here, it could be the mother of those children, but it could be the stepmother, right? So either way, what the father's afraid of is, listen, after I die, the sons are going to inherit, and then they're not going to treat my wife so nicely because they don't have to. They have all the money, and they can forget about her. If she's in charge of their estate, then they will give her honor. They will make sure to visit her often and treat her nicely. So even though she doesn't own it herself, but by giving her authority over it, then the kids will honor. And that is probably what the guy meant, what the husband meant when he wrote that kol nechasav leishto. It's an ambiguous phrase. Does it all go to her and belongs to her, or that she will be in charge of it? So that's his chidush. It only means he'll be in charge of it. Now, how about other cases? Pishita beno agadol lo asao ela apotropos beno katan mai. If someone in his will says, I want all my property to go to my oldest son, obviously, he just wants to make the son an apotropos for all the others, so that maybe there's young sons, there's minors there, so the older brother will take care of it. He doesn't. It's obvious he doesn't want to give everything only to the older brother. He just wants the older brother to be in charge, and the younger ones will then look up to him and see him as an authority, and he'll take care of the estate. So that's obvious. But what if he says, I want to leave all my property to my youngest son? What about that? Then maybe it doesn't make sense that all the older ones would have to honor the younger one, especially if the younger one's a minor. So maybe he really means it, and he really does want to redistribute, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says he can, and he give all the money only to the younger one forever. Is that true or not? Itemar, Rav Chanilai bar Idi Amar Shemuel, Afilu beno katan mutal ba'arisa. And we have an answer. Rav Chanilai bar Idi said the name of Shemuel, also said the previous halacha, even if it's a baby who's in a crib and the father gives everything to that baby, nevertheless, we assume that he wanted to appoint that baby as a steward when he becomes an adult. In the meantime, someone will have to take care of the estate. Maybe he named someone else, or they'll figure out who will take care of the estate. But once that baby becomes 13, then that 13-year-old will be in charge of the estate, does not inherit everything. And why did the father do that? Maybe he wanted to make sure that his other older kids don't pick on the younger one, but they'll give him honor since he is now in charge of their inheritance. Then they'll have to listen to his authority. And so we assume that the father would have wanted that to be the case, and not that he actually wanted to give everything only to the younger. Pishita beno ve'acher, acher b'matana u'beno apotropos. Now, another case that we know for sure. Let's say the father in his will says, I want to give all my inheritance to my son and to so-and-so, who's not even related. Now, why would he want to give everything to so-and-so? If it was only an apotropos, that doesn't make sense, because there's no need for all these people, for his sons, to have to give honor to some stranger. So whatever he said gave to the stranger must be as a gift, and that's a final gift that all goes to him. But the part that he says, I want the other half to go to my son, this one son, as opposed to the others, we assume that he didn't really mean that he wants to give to this only and not to the others, but rather that he wanted this son to be in charge of the estate. That's a simple case. Ishto ve'acher la'acher b'matana v'ishto apotropos. And similarly, if he writes in his will, I want all my property to go to half to my wife and half to some other person who's not related. The same thing. The person that's not related, there's no obligation, there's no need for his sons to have to give honor to some stranger. So therefore, it must be when he said half to go to that guy, then that's as a gift. And when the half that he said to his wife, as we said before, it's not that he wants to give everything to his wife and not leave his kids anything, but rather he wants to give it to his wife so that his kids will honor his wife. That makes sense. And so the stranger gets it as a gift, and his wife gets it only as a steward. Ishto arusa v'ishto gerusha bematana. If he writes in a document that I want to give everything to my betrothed, they didn't get married yet, but they only did kiddushin and not nisuin, and then the groom dies. Or if he says, I want to give everything over to my ex-wife, in that case it must be a gift, because there's no need for children or whatever other heirs that he has, whatever his father or brothers, whoever is left that would inherit from him. It doesn't make sense that he would give it to this ex-wife or this half-married wife for other people to give her honor. There's no need for those people to honor an ex. He's not looking for his kids even to honor an ex-wife. So therefore, if he says it, it must mean that he actually wants to give it as a gift, for whatever reason. Even though he got divorced, he does wanted to give it to her as a gift. Ibaya lehu bat esel habanim v'isha esel haachim v'isha esel bnei habal mahu. A follow-up question was asked. If someone in his will says, I want all my property to go to my daughter rather than his sons, even though he has sons and daughters. So what do we say there? Does he want his sons to honor his daughter? There's not generally an obligation for sons to honor a daughter, so maybe there he meant it as a gift, or maybe he does want them to honor their sister, or whatever, his daughter, whatever they are, half siblings or full siblings. So what about that case? Or how about the next case? Visha esel ha'achim, a wife compared to a person's brothers. Let's say a person has no children, and normally no father, his brothers would inherit him, and he writes, I want my wife to get it. So there's no obligation for brothers to have to give honor to their sister-in-law. So then maybe he means it as a gift to his wife, or maybe not. Maybe he does want her to be just a steward, so they give her respect. Or v'isha esel bnei haba'al, if a person has sons and a wife, but it's a stepmother to the sons, and he says, I give it to my wife, even though he has his own sons. So does he want his sons to give honor to his wife? They're also, after he dies, they don't have an obligation to give her honor, but maybe he wants them to honor her and is giving to her as a steward, or maybe not, and he's giving it to her as a gift. Mahu, what about all these cases? Two opinions. Amar Ravina, Mishmed Rava, Bechaluhu lo kana. Says in all these cases, this person, either the daughter or the wife, does not get it as a gift, but only as a steward. Meaning in all these cases, yes, the the deceased wants these people to give honor to his daughter or to his wife. And the only exception is the exception is these two cases that we just saw above. If he leaves his property to his betrothed or to his ex-wife, in those cases, the connection is not close enough yet that he would want other relatives to have to give them honor. And therefore, in these cases, it's totally a gift. That's Ravina's opinion. Rav Avira Mishme de Rava Amar. Bechulehu kaneh leban ma'isha etzel hachin ve'isha etzel bnei habal. Rav Avira has a different interpretation of what Rava said. Both are these in the name of Rava. In Rav Avira's version of what Rava says, he says in all these cases it's a gift, and so that would include the ex-wife and also these three cases, except for two of them. So which two are the exceptions? The wife compared to his brothers and the wife compared to his sons. In those two cases, she is a steward. So a person who dies, he would want his wife to be respected by his brothers or by his sons that are not from a different wife, and therefore he would leave it to his wife for her to be a steward, so that they will give her honor. Yes, but regarding the daughter, he says no. If he's giving it to a daughter instead of sons, then it doesn't make sense that he wants the sons to honor his daughter. He must rather want to give it to her totally as a gift, which is permitted in one interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. He says, I want my daughter to get everything, and so according to Rav Avira, then everything would go to the daughter as a gift. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.